What's up guys, welcome back. Hold on to your sporrans because we're about to paint some Haggis Tier Purple Tartan. Tartan designs can be insanely complicated, but the key to painting them is to break the pattern down into a series of simple steps. That way you don't get overwhelmed with the details. We'll start this off with a dark red. Now I'm using scale colour deep red. I quite like using the scale paints because the matte finish gives quite a good fabric effect, but you can use any red that you want. The first step is to create a series of little boxes, and that's going to make up the framework for our tartan. To do that, I paint on a row of vertical lines and I try to keep them evenly spaced. These don't have to be perfect because you can clean up as you progress through the design. Having said that, the neater you are at this stage, the less time you'll spend later on. So it is worth trying to be careful early on so that you don't waste time later. Once that's finished, I then paint another row of lines, this time making them perpendicular to the previous set. It's much easier to do this if you spin the model round so that your brush is always moving in the same direction. Obviously you can't always do that, so it really depends on the shape of the model that you're working on. You might have to make some concessions here and there, but if the situation presents itself, you should definitely take advantage of it. I realised at this point that the grid wasn't following the flow of the fabric on the right side here, so I just repositioned the lines slightly. That's one of the benefits to starting off with a grid, because you can easily see where it's gone wrong and fix it while it's still easy to do so. There are faster methods which don't start with a grid, but if something goes wrong it can be a nightmare to fix, so it's usually better to use this grid method just to save yourself from some future headaches. Once you've finished the grid, you can begin filling in the boxes with your various colours. So I'll use that same deep red paint and start to block in the pattern. We'll do this similar to a checkerboard, except that every other line we're going to leave blank. If your grid was a little wonky, you can use this stage to clean it up slightly as you paint in the squares, either straightening the edges or making the boxes slightly bigger or smaller, whatever your situation dictates. Then once that's finished, I mix a little scale colour black leather into some scale colour graphite to get this desaturated light purple. You can of course just use any light purple colour. The specific colour you use isn't really that important, it's totally down to personal preference, so use whatever colour you prefer. And now we'll go ahead and fill in every black square with the purple. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. You're thinking, wouldn't it make more sense to start off by painting the whole thing purple and then painting the red grid on top? And to that I say, yes. Yes it would.
Yeah, that's not what I was thinking.
Yeah, Angus, we don't really want to know what you were thinking, to be honest.
Get up, you wee Raj. It should be me doing this tutorial anyway. I'm more Scottish than you are.
I mean, yeah, but nobody can understand what you're saying, Angus, so I don't think it would work as a tutorial. They have to, be able to follow along.
I don't guess that.
They can't understand what you're saying either.
It's no wonder you need subtitles in every video, you glaikit looking walloper.
Just go away, I'm busy. Anyway, once you've filled in the purple, grab a brighter red. I'm using scale colour Antares red, but any bright red will do. Now, rather than blocking the colour in, instead you're going to paint little diagonal lines over the purple like this, filling in the boxes so that they complete the checkerboard pattern. Now, when you're doing this, there's no guidelines to show where the edge of each box is, so you have to imagine where the edges would be. I do this by visualising a line connecting the corners of the 4 red boxes surrounding the square, and I paint the lines on so that they fall inside that box. These lines are to simulate stitching on the fabric, so it's important that they all go in the same direction. If you were to change the direction on each box, you kind of lose the effect somewhat, and it will give you a more chaotic result. Use a light touch with the brush when you're doing this so that you're only painting with the very tip of the bristles. If you push down, you'll end up with quite a thick line, which isn't what you're going for. If you find this too difficult, you can just forgo doing the lining work altogether and block in the red normally as a solid colour. But do give the lines a try at least. If you don't like the result, you can always paint over it, so you might as well give it a go. Next we'll add some black into our purple mix to darken it down. And we'll use that to line between the boxes. I find I get the best results when I do the line in a single stroke, but it's not always possible when there's a lot of undulations on the surface. It makes doing it in one stroke really quite difficult, but just try and do the best that you can. Alright, so I do this over the whole surface, painting on the vertical lines between the boxes. You need to be quite neat at this stage, as it can be tricky to tidy up the lining work if you make a mistake. So just take your time here and make sure that your hands are braced together to reduce any shaking, and try to paint with the very tip of the brush. A good brush with a decent point will make it a lot easier. Check out the link in the description if you're interested in the brush that I use. The main thing is that you focus on trying not to press down while you're painting the lines, so that the width of each one stays consistent. Once you've done the vertical lines, turn the piece around and repeat the process, this time painting all the horizontal lines. I find it's much easier to do this if you rotate the model first, so that you're always moving the brush in the same direction. That way you're going to build up muscle memory and you get much better at painting the lines because you're always doing essentially the same movement. Next, we're going to mix some Vallejo ivory into that original light purple colour. And we'll use that brighter purple to paint lines down the middle of the columns that have the darker red boxes. This is going to be much harder than the previous step because there's no obvious guide to follow, so you just have to eyeball where the middle of the boxes are. You can see that I'm not quite as sure about myself here as the lines are going on a little bit wobbly, but that's okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. You're working on quite a small scale here, so little mistakes aren't that obvious when you're looking at the finished model. Once you've finished those lines, turn the piece around and again you're going to paint lines along the middle of the rows that have the dark red boxes. This is usually where you start to get a little anxiety about what you're doing, so try to take calming breaths. There's a tendency for you to unconsciously hold your breath while you're doing this, so try to be conscious of that because it's only going to make it harder for you. If you find that your hands start to shake, just stop and have a stretch and then try again later. To continue, I'll add some more ivory into that previous light purple mix, and I'll use that to place a little dot in the middle of where the pale lines intersect. To finish that pattern off, we're going to use that same dark lining colour we used earlier, and this time we'll paint lines down the middle of the stitched red boxes. You can see that I made a complete pig's ear of that one, but like I said earlier, it doesn't need to be perfect. As a finishing touch, we'll add some shading. So to do that, we're going to add some water to the dark lining colour, thinning it down to a glaze consistency. Then with a small amount on the brush, we're going to glaze that into the recessed areas of the coat. This part is going to test your confidence a fair bit because you're going to feel like you're going to ruin all that lining work. But if you build this up slowly over a few layers, it's going to be fine. You do start to lose a bit of detail using this method of shading, but it actually works out quite well because the design would actually get slightly obscured when in shadow, so a slight loss in detail only adds to the realism. Just don't apply so many layers of the glaze that you totally lose the design. You can see that after only a few coats you start to build up a really nice effect. It should look something like this when you finish. I think it's one of the better tartan designs that I've done. I really like the colours and the level of complexity. Alright guys, so that is how you paint a pretty convincing tartan design on your minis. I hope you try it out. You can swap out the colours and use whatever you like, really. You don't have to use just purple and red. If you give this a go, send me a picture and I might feature it on a future video. Alright, so I think that's all for me. Thanks again. Bye for now. you.